Alrighty, thanks for joining me today where we're going to talk about employee happiness in workplaces in the financial sector. Why are we talking about this? Well, first of all, it's a huge sector, right? I mean, so many people work in banks, they work in investment, they work in insurance companies, pension companies, similar financial sector workplaces. So this is a topic that affects a lot of people. And I will also say that it's not a sector that has necessarily the biggest focus on employee well-being and employee happiness. Um, I did a talk some years ago at a big bank in South Africa, and after my talk, this female employee came up to me and said, "Well, Alex, I had never realized that it's possible to be happy at work." Right? It was that the idea that you can actually enjoy your job was a completely new idea to her, and that really opened her eyes. And I think, that was an interesting reaction right there. Also, I know this sector really well. I have done so many talks and workshops at banks, insurance companies, pension companies, that kind of thing. So I know the ins and outs. I know what affects people in this sector, and I know what helps them get better and happier at work. So we are going to talk about this, and it is a sector that needs some of this focus. Here's two results from a UK study from 2023, where they found that 83% of finance sector employees have considered changing jobs due to the impact of work on their mental health. So their job is affecting their mental health so negatively that they've actually considered changing jobs, and half of those people have actually done so. That is a huge number of people changing jobs because their job is not good for them. And also 60% of the employees in the sector feel their employer could do more. And I completely agree. In most financial sector workplaces, the employer, the company could do more. So we're going to talk about that, and these are the topics. I want to talk about some of the challenges in this sector. As I said, I've done so many talks here. I know this sector pretty well. Also want to talk about some opportunities because you can create really great workplaces in finance. Many workplaces have done that. We're going to talk about how to do it, and the opportunities they have. We also want to talk. I want to talk about why we should do this. I mean, why should a bank or a pension company or similar focus on employee happiness? And that's obvious because it's good for the bottom line, and happy financial sector workplaces make more money. We're going to talk about why that is, specifically in the finance sector. And finally, I'm going to share some great examples from some of these workplaces that I visited around the world. Let's talk about it. I have coffee. I hope you do too. Let's do this. And let's start with the challenges. So looking across workplaces in this sector, what are some of the overarching challenges that I see a lot? And one of them is definitely long working hours. In 2021, a group of young employees at Goldman Sachs sent an open letter to top leadership asking if it would be okay if they cut down their working hours to only 80 hours a week. Like, cut down to 80 hours a week. They were denied. It's not a secret that many financial sector workplaces expect employees to work really, really long hours. I think the poster child for this has to be Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase. He wants his employees in the office 70, 80, 90 hours a week, and he wants them physically in the office. He hates remote working. He feels like people don't work when they are not physically in the office. The wildest quote I have seen on this is from Michael Bloomberg, who said that my key to success is to always be working. Be the first one in the office, be the last one to leave. And then he says, never take a lunch break and never take a bathroom break. And I'm like, how are you going to work a long workday with no lunch and no bathroom breaks? What do you keep a bottle at your desk? I cannot figure this out. But it shows that a lot of people in this sector are of the belief that the more people work, the more success the company will have. And that is, of course, wrong. We know from so much research that overwork leads to worse company results. Let me say that again. Overwork leads to worse company results. Why? It's not exactly a secret, right? People get tired when we're overworked. And we know from a ton of research that overworked employees are less productive, less creative, they make more mistakes. They have more accidents in the workplace, maybe less relevant in a financial sector workplace. They make worse decisions. That is definitely relevant. They are less likely to help their coworkers, and they are dumber. Yes, this is true. There was a study from the British government sector where they found that employees who work more than 50 hours a week score significantly lower on standardized IQ tests than those who work a normal 40-hour work week. So this idea that we can just, if you want better results, make people work more hours and people should work 80 hours a week, turns out to be completely wrong. And one article from the Harvard Business Review actually summed it up like this and said that there is significant evidence that long working hours hurt employees and the bottom line. And the bottom line. But this is definitely one thing that affects a lot of people in this sector. Another challenge in this sector is the constant change. And I've heard so many employees in these kinds of workplaces say things like, we just completed one major change project and now they're launching the next one. Nothing is ever stable, nothing's ever predictable. There's constant change, and it can be changes to things like this, new laws and regulations. Finance is, of course, a heavily regulated sector, as it should be. And there are always new laws and regulations coming in that we have to deal with. New products and services, new processes and workflows, new IT systems and tools. Like right now, AI is the big new thing that people have to deal with. Reorganizations inside the organization, new safety and security requirements, and changing customer expectations could be some of the things that force these changes. And we know that constant change in the workplace can be very negative if the changes are major in scope, if they're unexpected or unpredictable, if they're introduced without explaining why the change is necessary, and if the change doesn't seem meaningful to employees. If that is the case, then constant change in the workplace is a stressor and makes people very unhappy and frustrated at work. And that is indeed the case in many financial sector workplaces. And here's the thing. If the workplace is changing rapidly, and most workplaces are these days, then we need our employees to function at their best in order to make these changes successful. If our employees are frustrated and unhappy at work, they're not as creative, they're not as innovative, and they're not as engaged and motivated in making these changes actually successful. And that can actually lead to a vicious cycle where employees, they face constant changes, so they're not very happy at work. That makes the changes the change less likely to succeed, and that makes employees even more frustrated for the next change and skeptical in advance of every change that's coming. On the other hand, in good workplaces, I've seen where change is handled well. I've seen employees be very optimistic about any future change. They're like, oh yeah, if top management says we're doing this, I'm sure it's a good idea. Let's work hard to make that a success. So that is definitely another reason why having happy employees is so important in a financial sector workplace, because it helps you successfully change whatever needs to change. Another challenge in many financial sector workplaces is bad managers. Um, I have an example. I worked with one of the biggest banks in Denmark, and they noticed that their employees weren't very happy or engaged or motivated. They hired us to come in and work with them. And one of the things we found, so we analyzed the root cause of the unhappiness. And one of the things we found was that some teams were happy. They'd measured employee satisfaction every year. And some teams were unhappy going back like 5 years. And it was the same teams. And looking at the results, everybody knew why. It was the local managers in those teams who were not very good managers. So they had known about this. The bank had known about this for 5 years, and they had done nothing. No training for those managers, no replacing those managers, no follow-up to the employees, no nothing. And that sent a very clear signal to the employees that, yeah, you're unhappy, we don't care. We know the manager are the problem here, we're not going to do anything about it. And I think this is depressingly common in finance. Finance workplaces have like a laser-like focus on results and numbers and money. I mean, that's the business they're in, right? So very, very often, signals that say that, this team is suffering, this team is unhappy, or here we have a bad manager, they just ignore that. They don't do anything about it. But that will, of course, come back and hurt them in the end, because if you have a bad manager, the team is going to be unhappy. If the team is unhappy, you get worse results. This is not exactly rocket science. So bad managers are definitely rampant in many financial sector workplaces, and something we need to change. And the final thing I want to mention is a lack of meaning and purpose. So another one of my clients was a big insurance company, and this company was doing better than ever. They had record turnover, record profits, best profits ever. The investors were so happy. But the problem was that while the company was doing great, the employees were doing terrible. There was a lot of absenteeism, a lot of stress, a lot of burnout, high employee turnover, and those two things were actually connected because what had happened was that um, in order to create these great results, they had streamlined every process and they had taken a lot of autonomy and freedom away from the employees who now had to follow very, very strict guidelines. They had also increased the productivity goals for all the employees. So now they had to run faster and faster and achieve more and more results. And those two things taken together meant that employees felt burned out, they felt ignored, and they also felt like their work was becoming increasingly meaningless. Because what mattered to the employees in this insurance company was not, profits, fine, of course we want the company to be successful, but what mattered to them, what made their work meaningful, was the ability to help the clients. To help, if somebody's house burns down, you want to help that person because they absolutely need you now. And they found that they were less able to do that because there were now more strict guidelines on how they were doing their jobs. And they had to work faster. So they felt they couldn't do as good of a job on each individual case because they had to handle more cases. So that's an example of a company over prioritizing the business results to the detriment of the employees' feeling of meaning and purpose in their jobs. What this company ended up doing was two things. First of all, give employees back some of their freedom to do their jobs their way instead of like strict guidelines. And they also help the employees focus on where they made a difference. So when they got feedback from customers saying, you really helped us in a difficult situation, they would make sure to bring that feedback back to the employees so they knew that they were making a difference. They knew that they were doing a good job and helping people who desperately needed them. Another example of a company I saw that did this really well was Quicken Loans in Detroit. They do house mortgages. I went there to visit them and study them. This is their offices. And at Quicken Loans, they say very clearly that numbers and money don't. Sorry, I should say that correctly. Numbers and money follow; they don't lead. And that is a clear way to say that. Yes, we want this company to be successful, but if as a company we put the bottom line first, we will actually end up making less money. If we put our culture and our employees first, they will do a great job and we will make more money. Another example of a company that does this is, that used to do this is Southwest Airlines, who said very clearly that their number one strategic priority was the employees, because when the employees did a good job, they made the customers happy. They were the second priority. When the customers were happy, they flew Southwest Airlines again. And then the bottom line, the investors were happy. That was the third priority. Southwest Airlines is an interesting case because they've been bought by a corporate raider, and now they have a strict bottom line focus, and it seems to be hurting both the employees and the customers and the bottom line. And it'll be very interesting to see where this goes over the next few years. So those were the four main challenges to employee happiness in financial sector workplaces. There are also some opportunities. First of all, financial sector workplaces have the resources to do something about this. It's not like a sector like retail or hospitality with razor thin margins where you have to like flip every coin before you decide if you can spend it on employees. Financial sector workplaces have the resources to do something about it, spend some money on it. This can also be a little bit of a trap because very often they'll spend it on stuff like perks, like fancy coffee in the office or whatever. And as we know, those are not the things that make employees happy at work. Those can at best make employees satisfied. We're going to talk about what it is that makes them happy. And I think the other opportunity in financial sector workplaces is that you have a highly trained workforce, right? You have people who are smart, who are well educated, who are interested in creating good workplaces. And I really like that because these people, I find them, they're easy to work with, they're easy to inspire, they're easy to influence to actually do something about happiness at work. And I think that's a fantastic resource that financial sector workplaces have. Cool. Let's talk about why we should focus on happiness at work. What are the specific benefits that workplaces get out of this? And these are I would say, the general benefits that you get for employees. So we know from a ton of research that happy employees are more productive, more creative, more helpful, yada, 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 yada. You can take a look at this, pause the video if you want, and take a look at this. We know that on all of these parameters, happy employees do a better job. If we look specifically at financial sector workplace, I mean, all of these are great, but specifically in financial sector workplaces, which of these are most important? Um, just from my experience, I would say productivity. Obviously, we want to do as much work as we can with the resources we have. Better customer service, so your bank customers or your pension company customers are happy. Focus on quality. Quality is incredibly important. Following the rules, following the regulations, doing your job correctly is incredibly important. Better team players, so people actually work together on achieving their goals. More resilient, again, in the face of changes and constant new challenges. And finally, learn faster. And again, if the workplace is constantly changing, new laws, new regulations, new IT systems, we need people to be able to learn fast. And on every single one of these, we know that happy employees do a better job. This also gives the workplace some advantages. And these are the advantages that we know that happy workplaces have. So higher productivity, more creativity and innovation, better sales, and so on. And I would say specifically, again, in the financial sector, I think some of these are probably really important. Lower employee turnover. I just read the biggest study of U.S. banks found that the average turnover rate for non-leadership roles was 20%. Can you imagine that, losing 1/5 of your employees every single year? Um, and what makes this worse is that this is, of course, voluntary turnover. So these are probably your best employees, the ones who have the easiest time finding a new job. Those are the ones leaving, and they're probably going to the competition because that's where their skills are most directly transferable, and that's hugely expensive. We know that the rule of thumb is that replacing a non-skilled employee costs 1 year's salary, and for skilled employees, it's more like or middle managers, more like 2 years, 1.5 to 2 years salary. Hugely expensive. And it's worth noting that some of the happiest financial sector workplaces that I work with have employee turnover rates around 3 to 5%. So I think it's not hard to calculate how much money and time and overall hassle lowering your employee turnover rate is going to save you. Attracting the best talent. It's clear that if you have a great workplace, people are working there, they're going to recommend everybody else to come work, and you'll have an easier time attracting great employees. And finally, higher customer loyalty. Again, this is no surprise. There's no surprise here. If your employees do a good job, they're going to treat the customers well, and that is going to make the customers stay longer. I saw a great post. I'll find the exact quote here. I saw a great post on LinkedIn the other day from a regional director at a Danish bank called Arbejdernes Landsbank. And his leadership philosophy was, we do not have a goal of retaining employees. Instead, we focus on creating happiness at work and thus make people want to stay. And I thought that was a great focus for a bank. So these are some of the challenges. These are some of the opportunities. And this is why it matters, because happy companies make more money. A ton of research to prove that, especially in the financial sector. So how do we do it? I'm gonna give some examples from that I've seen work really well in some of these workplaces around the world. But first of all, I think we need to know where we focus. So what is it that makes people happy at work? And we have studied this extensively. There's a ton of research on this. And I just want to make it very clear that it's not about perks. It's not about promotions. It's not about salaries. It's not about, pensions and that kind of thing. What really makes us happy at work is results and relationships. I mean, salaries need to be fair, obviously. But what really makes people happy at work is results and relationships. These are the two that's our model for it, the two things we need to focus on. Results is when people do a good job, when they can achieve their goals, when they are proud of the work they do, and when they make meaningful results so they can see that their work is actually helping somebody who needs it. We talked a little bit about this already. And then relationships is when people feel like they belong. They feel accepted in the workplace. They have a good relationship with their team members, good relationship with their immediate manager. This feeling that I am valued in the workplace, not just as a resource, but also as a human being. I know the people I work with, they know me, we like each other, we work well together. That is where we need to focus. And I would say that in many financial sector workplaces, when they do start working with employee well-being, a lot of it is like yoga classes and fancy coffee or cake every Friday, and those things are useless. It's not going to make anybody any happier at work. Cool. So here are some good examples of companies that manage to focus on this and actually build really, really great workplaces in the financial sector. One that we work with a lot is SEB Pension Company in Copenhagen. And what I love about their approach is that it was very strategic, and it was both top down and bottom up. And I mean, I always get the question, right? Who's responsible for happiness at work? Is it the leadership or the employees? And the answer is yes, it's both. So what they did was inspired by the CEO. The CEO at the time, Søren Lockwood, had this realization that the only way they could create great results was if the customers were happy. And the only way they could make the customers happy was if the employees were happy. So he made it a central strategic focus of his leadership to create a happy pension company, to make his employees happy at work. They had 800 employees at the time. And he did what so he focused on that, but he also needed somebody to actively lead that process. So he appointed a chief happiness officer. And this was not a full-time position. It was actually, he found somebody who was really passionate. It happened to be a lady called Helene, who was the head of legal. So as part of her job was now to drive this process, to be the chief happiness officer in sort of a project manager role, to make sure that the bank kept its focus on happiness at work. And what she did, which I thought was really cool, was that she appointed a group of happiness ambassadors. She put out the call inside the organization, who wants to be a part of this? And some employees volunteered. She had a group of 6 volunteers who came up with a lot of great ideas for creating a happier bank bottom up. So you had the CEO focusing top down, and you had this happiness ambassador group focusing bottom up, and doing a lot of great initiatives. And ideas that come from the employees themselves are very, very likely to be good ideas because they know their working conditions. They did so many cool things. My favorite little thing that I don't think I've seen anywhere else is they introduced these flower garlands, like a Hawaiian flower necklace. And the idea was that if you were going on vacation, then on your last day at work, you could wear this lei around the office, and people could be like, hey, you're going on vacation. Where are you going? So that's a chance to connect with your coworkers. But it's also a practical thing because, hey, are you leaving on vacation? Before you go, I just need to ask you one thing. How do we do whatever, right? By the way, when you're on vacation, you can hang the lei on your desk so people can see, oh, he's on vacation. Great, I'll catch him when he's back. Silly little thing, but it came from the employees themselves, and it worked really well. They did many other things in addition to that. And speaking of good management and the importance of having good managers, another simple thing they introduced was a manager buddy program. You could call it co-mentoring. So every manager picked a buddy, another manager inside the organization, and they met every 2 weeks to discuss whatever challenges they were facing, whatever questions they had, to help each other become better managers. Each of them chose some focus areas, and then they would hold each other accountable for actually developing on that and give each other feedback and ideas. I thought that was a great way to, again, build relationships between the managers, but also to develop your management skills. Great example. Another bank that I got to work with recently is the National Bank of Kuwait. This is their headquarters in Kuwait City. Beautiful, beautiful building. And they have a huge focus on employee happiness, again, driven by the CEO. In this case, the HR is the daily driver of this, of coming up with programs and making this thing work. And again, one thing they also focus on is developing managers and making sure they have good managers inside the bank. They have an internal management development program for all new managers. I think that's amazing. And this goes on over months, where they are introduced to a lot of new skills. They also brought me in. I did a talk for all of their top-level managers, and then I did a talk for 120 of their upcoming managers, a half-day workshop at their headquarters in in Kuwait. By the way, it's super hard to stay focused when you have this massive window behind the audience looking out over the Arabian Sea. That was absolutely fascinating. So this constant focus on training managers, creating good managers, so you have managers who actually focus on the employees, I think is something they do really, really well. But my favorite thing that they told me about that they do is their MVP program. So once a year, they have a thing where they will, for every team in this bank, they will appoint an MVP, most valuable player. And what happens is that one day this sign will appear on your floor, on the floor of where you work, and that means today is your turn. And then the CEO will come in and appoint the MVP and say a little about why. So why is this person such a great employee? So this is an example of positive, meaningful, positive feedback coming from the CEO. That is incredibly valuable. That is an incredible thing to do for the bank. By the way, they have offices around the world, so they make sure that if the CEO is doing a roadshow, is on a trip to a certain city, then they will do the MVP while this ceremony, while the CEO is there. So it will come directly from him, and I think that's absolutely fascinating. What a great way to do it. By the way, I find that companies in the Gulf region have a lot of companies there have a great focus on happiness at work. I'm very impressed by it. And the final example I mention is this workplace. And you might look at this name and giggle, Middelfart. There's a town in Denmark called Middelfart, means middle of the way, middle of the road, middle of your travels. But yeah, it is a funny name. Whenever I speak abroad and I mention Middelfart Bank, people are like, some people giggle. And they have this bank has a great focus on happiness at work. Have had it for decades now. And they have been voted best workplace in Denmark many times. They've been voted best workplace in Europe a couple of times as well. And employee happiness is a core focus for them. In fact, every year they publish their culture profile. This is 170 pages of all of their initiatives to create a better workplace. And I just want to mention from page 40. From page 40, their CEO says, we see a direct line from satisfied employees to satisfied customers. If you come to work happy, you have the energy to be smiley and forthcoming to the customers. Again, direct line right there. And this is something they see also in the numbers. They've been very, very profitable, very successful. And they have the happiest customers of any bank in Denmark. I've done some talks there. This is they set up they have this massive stairway inside the office. They set it up for my talk, so people sat there with all of these smiley pillows. I thought that was funny. And one other thing I'll mention that they've done in addition to this strategic focus on happiness at work is minimizing rules and regulations and giving their employees autonomy and trust. And I know this seems weird in a bank, right, where there's usually rules for everything. But they say that you'd be amazed what happens once people are empowered to make decisions. So they talk about self-leadership. And some examples of that are, for instance, as a customer advisor in this bank, there is no upper limit on what size loan you can approve. If you think the customer should get this loan, you can approve it. And I think that makes work more meaningful for employees because they can do their job as they see best instead of always sticking to some rules that may not be always applicable. I talked to their HR manager at the time, this is a few years ago, who said that at one point they had gotten rid of their dress code. And the first time he sees an employee in shorts in the office, he's like, "Oh my God, what do we do?" And then he realizes, hey, this is an adult human being. If he's wearing shorts, he probably doesn't have any customer meetings today, and he's fine wearing shorts. I thought that was great. One of my favorite examples is also it was Christmas season, and every team has the typical Christmas party. And one of the team leaders calls the HR manager to ask, "Hey, I'm having a team dinner for my team. What's my budget per person?" And the HR manager just goes, "How should I know?" and hangs up. Just to show him that that's your decision. This is your team. It's your budget. I can't answer that. You make an educated decision. And by the way, what ended up happening was that this CEO did this team leader ended up having the team dinner at his home, cooking for people, which made the whole thing more personal, created better relationships, more impactful, and cheaper for the bank. What often happens if you give people a budget, they will go to that budget and spend all of it. But in this case, people are expected to make an educated decision for themselves. And if you hire smart, committed people, they probably know better than you do what should be done. So minimizing the rules and regulations, I think, is great. Awesome. That was the last. There are so many great examples. This is what we have time for today. I am writing a white paper on employee happiness in financial sector workplace. I'll link to that in the materials for this video. And I also just want to say that if you are interested in this topic of happiness at work, you should consider joining our Chief Happiness Officer Academy, an in-depth 3-day training in Copenhagen where we cover all of the aspects of creating happy workplaces. You should look into HeartCount, a company that I co-founded, which is the best tool out there for measuring happiness at work. 3 questions every Friday. It takes 10 seconds and you have actual, up-to-date, live data on how your employees are doing. And finally, if you really want to create a happy workplace, you should absolutely hire me to come speak. I am pretty good at it. My average rating out of 10 for my last 300 talks is 9.6 out of 10. I am very, very proud of that. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any comments, any questions, write a comment and stay happy.